Boy, oh boy, have I struggled on the carnivore diet. Hey, what's shaking bacon? My name is Bruno Panucci. I hope you're doing well. So a lot of people have been trying the carnivore diet. It's actually getting quite well known now. It's not crazy well known. People are really starting to get to know it, I think mainly from the keto world, because you can still do a ketogenic proportion on a carnivore diet. So they felt pretty good on keto, so they switched to carnivore. But they have a rough time sticking to carnivore because now they have to break up with sugar addiction. And when you do keto, you can still have sugar substitutes. So now that you're breaking up with that dopamine fix and you're doing a strict animal diet where it's just fat and protein, and you ideally stay away from any sweeteners. So when you have spices that you put on your steak, you have to look at the ingredients in those spices, because what you'll find is there's often sugar in those mixed spices, and you got to watch it when there's sauces on your steak. So when you get to the point where you're trying to do strict carnivore, it can be difficult. I had a horrible time trying to become a strict carnivore. In fact, it took years before I became a strict carnivore. I started zero carb in 2013, at the end of 2013, and I started carnivore in the spring or summer of 2018. I started carnivore, I was doing it or I wasn't doing it, and there was no in between because I had a sugar addiction. I couldn't stop it, and it made it very difficult. Now, I have no problem. I haven't struggled in the last, 3 years of doing carnivore. I find it extremely easy because sugar doesn't call out to me anymore. Carbohydrates don't call out to me anymore because I became super strict. If you find you're struggling on a carnivore diet and food's always calling out to you and you're always cheating and you want to be strict because you feel good, it just makes your energy good and everything just moves well throughout the day for you, and you can't argue with your results from your blood work, and your doctor sees that you are in much better shape and everything's going well, but you have a hard time sticking to that carnivore diet. It's often because you're trying to break up with carbohydrates. And I struggled from 2018 till 2021 trying to be strict. So technically I started the carnivore diet in 2018, but I don't really consider my carnivore diet being a strict carnivore diet. So I usually say I've only been doing carnivore for 3.5 years. There's a lot of seasoned carnivores out there who've been doing it longer since they first came across carnivore, but they had trouble being strict. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some people don't need to be 100% strict. They're virtually 99% strict or 98% strict, and they just give in to the odd little temptation. Maybe it's a glass of wine, maybe it's a fruit here or there, but they have a difficult time being 100% strict. And this video is for you people. What changed for me? What made it easy for me to become 100% strict when I was off a carnivore diet and struggling to be consistent on a carnivore diet? Well, there's lots of things you can do, but the big one is really what happened at the end of my story. So you're gonna have to bear with me just for a minute. So I started a carnivore diet and I got rid of my gout, and it was a really nice feeling. But what happened was I started getting kidney stones, and 3 months into my carnivore diet, I got kidney stones, but my gout was gone. Because my blood sugar is better regulated, it wasn't aggravating my gout. And I found out what happened was my body was eliminating all those uric acid crystals. So that's why I first went off a carnivore diet, even though I was thriving on that way of eating. I felt great. Even people who were skeptical about me doing that way of eating, who were like, "What are you doing? That is crazy," saw me after 3 months and they were like, "I can't believe how amazing you look. You look fantastic." And it wasn't just the weight loss, it was my complexion. I just had like a bit of a glow, so to speak, and I looked noticeably different. And they were surprised. The people who were the naysayers were the most surprised that hadn't seen me in a couple months. So it was really interesting. I went off the carnivore diet because I was in a lot of pain, and quite frankly, I heard beer was beneficial for kidney stones, and I didn't realize it was uric acid-based kidney stones, so I was drinking some beer to help pass those kidney stones. Believe it or not, that's what they used to do in the medical profession years ago. But I found ever since getting on a carnivore diet and staying strict with it and continuing to stay on a carnivore diet was really difficult. I was giving in to all sorts of temptations. Sometimes it was after a few days, sometimes it was after a few weeks, sometimes it was after 2 or 3 months. There was always some reason I gave into it. And whether it was a treat food or a cheat meal, or I just decided, oh, well, I've been doing good, and you just convince yourself for some reason to put that food in your mouth that you shouldn't be eating, what's happening is you're lying to yourself. You're sabotaging yourself. Ultimately, that's what's happening. And you have to recognize that's what it is. Why are you sabotaging yourself? You have to stop and dig deeper for that answer. The same thing applies to people who are trying to quit smoking. The same thing applies to people who are trying to quit drugs or alcohol or any habit they want to quit. When you go back to doing that thing that you are trying to quit, you're sabotaging yourself, whatever the reason, even if it's just guilt because your child says to you, please have this. I really want you to have this. And you say, well, it's my grandchild and, what's a bite of a cookie or a bite of a muffin or a whole muffin, whatever it is. That's just an excuse. And if you're fine with being 98% carnivore, that's great. But if you're trying to be 100% because you just feel better at 100%, that last couple percentage points between, say, 95% and 100% carnivore is the world to some people. That's the little window that makes them feel great. What happened to me was eventually at the end of 2020, I had to put my dog down. And she was a great dog. Her name was Sweepy, and she was a beautiful dog. She just loved everybody instantly. Hated other animals, but loved people. And she was one of those dogs everyone was like, wow, I wish I could take this dog home with me. She just loved people and they loved her back. And she got really sick. She started getting seizures and it happened so fast. She just degenerated really fast and I had to put her down. And I just did, from the time she got sick till the time I had to put her down, it was only 6 weeks or so. And she declined so rapidly, and it was horrible to see her go through these seizures. By the time they put her on medication for it, it was too late, and she had just degenerated so bad. When I put her down, I continued to binge really bad. And I binged so bad, I'm not exaggerating, I was living off ice cream, pizza, and cake. That's it. An expensive cake. It was either ice cream cake from a local store or it was 3 containers of Haagen-Dazs all at once. And I would do that with pizza and I could do that with cake. I just lived off junk food for 4 months. It was actually 5 months, from August till January, the very beginning of January. And it wasn't a New Year's resolution that made me kind of straighten out. It was nothing like that. I realized after the first month, wow, I have never binged like this for a whole month. I've done that on like long weekends, maybe a whole week or something like that. And I just decided to heck with it. And I just went out and went crazy with all the junk food. But eventually I would kind of clean up my diet a little bit and just have those things as treats. But I was living off food for that first month. And I realized I got to straighten that out. I've never done something like this for that long. And then at the end of the second month, I realized I didn't even slow down. I had the best of intentions every day I woke up that I was going to be really good that day. And by 10 or 11 o'clock, I was ordering a pizza. And then while I was out getting the pizza, I would pick up the ice cream or cake. And that's all I ate for the whole day. And then the same thing happened at the end of the third month. I thought, wow, I didn't even slow down. And it's the end of the third month. I tried. I felt good every day going into each day. I'd wake up at about 6, 7 o'clock. And by 10, 11 o'clock, there I was ordering pizza. I wasn't working that much either. I was clearly going through some sort of depression. It was a really tragic thing, probably the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life. I mean, that dog, it was just a beautiful relationship. She was like my shadow. We just loved each other's company all the time. I'm not trying to make a woe is me story, but the point is this went on for 5 months total. And at the end of the 5 months, this is what happened to me. And this is the click that went off in my head that made me stop eating sugar and carbohydrates. I realized the depth of my addiction. Before that, I was always trying to manage my addiction. And when you're trying to manage an addiction, assuming you do have an addiction, if you're one of those people that when you fall off the wagon, you really fall off the wagon, maybe there's an addiction going on. If you're going through withdrawals when you try and cut something out of your diet, maybe there's a good chance you have an addiction. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean I was doing dirty things in a back alley to get some sugar, but I tell you, it wasn't a good situation. I'd give in to the slightest temptation and it was a real shame. And keep in mind, all of that was after a major heart attack. One of the reasons why I became carnivore was to manage my heart disease. So I was doing all this with a history of a heart attack just a few years before. So that is what changed. At that point, at the end of that 5 months, within the first few days of January, before I really went back to work, I was sitting there one day and I realized 5 months of eating all that junk food. I was spending a lot of money on that food. I was dropping a good $30, $40 a day eating that way. That's expensive. That's very expensive. And what did I have to show for it? Nothing. And I realized there is no compromise with addiction. I realized the depth of my addiction. And once I realized it controlled me, it completely owned me, and there was no managing it. Like a little treat here, a little treat there, a little bit once a day, a little bit every day with each meal, maybe once a week, doesn't matter. However you try and manage it, if you're dealing with addiction, you have to stop. And the problem is, once you stop, whether it's 3 months later, 6 months later, I read this all the time in Facebook carnivore groups. There's lots of people who turn around and say, I was strict carnivore for 2 years, 3 years, and then I decided to have a glass of wine, or I decided to have a little bit of ice cream or cake, and they couldn't get to strict carnivore again. They gave into that addiction, and that dopamine just fired off in their brain. And after that, they just couldn't become strict again. They had such a rough time. And it's a difficult thing to overcome an addiction. There's a difference between saying, oh, I love pasta, I'd hate to have to give it up, I'm addicted to pasta, and truly admitting that it's a problem. Now, I was in that first category for the first number of years, even though I knew I was dealing with sugar and carbohydrate addiction. And it took me till I had that moment of realization how deeply that condition owned me. That addiction was way too severe to try and manage, and I had to just cut it out. And believe it or not, this is the craziest thing. When I cut it out and I realized the severity of my addiction, it's like something went off. And I had no desire. It was like a moment of clarity. I had no desire at that point to have any junk food. It was the easiest thing I've ever gone through from that point on, being strict carnivore. So you have to ask yourself, what can you do to make it more manageable for you? Because in those months and years beforehand, there were lots of things I was trying to do. So one is ask what your why is. Why are you doing this to begin with? And that's a real thing that's out there in the carnivore world. What is your why? But after that, you have to set yourself up in the best situation when you're dealing with addiction. Get your weaknesses out of your house. Change your old habits. If getting together with the guys or the gals for the weekend or one night, you're going to be drinking, or you're going to be doing something that is going to revolve around junk food, and you're going to give in. It's one thing when you go there with the best of intentions and you give in, but you're going to give in because you've been in that situation plenty of times. You have to take yourself out of those situations, at least for a while. I can make pizza. I can go to my friends' places and I could serve anything and put it in front of me, and I have no desire for it anymore. It's completely gone. And it's a wonderful place to be. And I want you to get there too. And you have to remember, part of it starts with, what is your why? And then from there, recognize the depth of your addiction. And once you surrender to that addiction, then you can move forward. So I hope that helps you. Thanks a lot and take care.